Welcome to another episode of the Domus Search Leadership Podcast, where I speak with the most fascinating C-suite leaders in biotech, medtech, and pharmaceutical industries. And as my LinkedIn network are sure aware, I've been pumping it for the last week. Delighted to be joined today by Anthony Tennyson, who's co-founder and chief executive officer of Awakn Life Sciences, who are a revenue-generating biotech company who are researching, developing, and commercializing therapeutics to treat addiction, with a near-term focus on alcohol use disorder as well. There's lots of other stuff going on. For anybody who follows Awakn, you'll see new partnerships in the US. You'll see growth in the Nordics as well, and plans for Europe. Some really exciting recent tranche of funding as well. Welcome to the podcast, Anthony. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to speak with you and to speak with everyone who's dialing into or joining the podcast. Yeah. Thank you.
Amazing. So I think we first spoke late last year as well. 21 was introduced to the business, and I got to work really closely with you and James on a CMO search where Arun has hopefully settled in nicely now with a lot of interesting skills.
Yeah, he is indeed. He's been a great addition to the team. So very, very grateful for the process that you helped us run and were successful on. And Arun, he brings a huge amount of value to the team, a new level of insight into what we do, having very experienced in the addiction treatment industry in the UK. And now it's brilliant to bring his deep experience to bear to our new approach to treating addiction, to help solve what is potentially or probably one of the biggest problems facing society today.
Absolutely. And I think I'd had some experience or enough experience, like thinking with working with biotechs and pharma, but it was the first time I'd really gone deep into the psychedelic industry, and then the added layer of the great work that Awakn are doing with the psychotherapy as well. It showed me how small the industry was, but how huge it was at the same time. How challenging it was to find the very few people who can really latch on to what you're doing and what you're looking to achieve. And maybe this is a good time to get your take or your introduction on Awakn and where it's all come from.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So like you said in your introduction, we're a biotech. We develop and we commercialize therapeutics to treat addiction. And we got a near-term focus on alcohol use disorder. And alcohol use disorder, it's unfortunate. It's a condition that affects 300 million people globally. And it has a very poor current standard of care. Our research suggests that there's about a 75% relapse rate within the first 12 months post-treatment. So that's a 25% success rate, 75% relapse rate. But actually, I was talking to a guy who has 12 addiction treatment clinics in the US the other day. And when I mentioned the 25% success rate, he shook his head. They have a single-digit percentage success rate with treating alcohol use disorder. And so what we have in some of the work that we have completed, including a phase 2 trial in the UK, we achieved an 86% abstinence rate in the 6 months post-treatment. So that is the power that psychedelics have in conjunction with psychotherapy to treat addiction in general and alcohol use disorder in particular. So that's what we are. We develop them and we also commercialize them or deliver them. So we've got a relatively deep R&D program, a couple of R&D programs. All of those are focused on using psychedelic drugs to make therapy more effective in the context of treating addiction. And that approach of using psychedelic drugs and therapy together, it's quite new. And so we are also delivering those and commercializing those therapeutics today. And the reason we do that is so that we can understand the operating model, the delivery model, and the commercial model, and sort of help build the ecosystem for retooling the addiction treatment industry to enable them to deliver these therapeutics at scale in due course. So that's us at a very, very high level. Absolutely.
And as we spoke before as well, this is not a retreat where you can go away for a week and just have a quick catch-up session with psychedelic medicine and have a dabble. This is something you're looking to commercially roll out, like you say, with a label that's highly regulated. And you said the boring stuff, but it's so true, isn't it? Something that is favored by the insurers and such, that you can scale and help treat addiction without just dabbling in the industry.
Yeah, look, our purpose as a company is to democratize psychedelics, and democratization means available through the public healthcare system and through the insurance reimbursement or through health and benefit plans. In order to do that, we need to be on label. So we need marketing authorization, UK, EU, and we need regulatory approval in the US and other territories. And if we are successful in doing that, either ourselves or through licensing partnerships with bigger companies, that will enable us to have our therapeutics on label. And if we are on label, then the NHS can engage with what we do, the French public healthcare system, the German public healthcare system, and then over in the US, the big insurance-funded healthcare systems. And so the psychedelics industry, when you think about it, it's been around for thousands of years, with the traditional organic psychedelics of psilocybin, which is in mushrooms. And then also there was a very strong amount of research conducted in more traditional industry in the 50s and 60s, particularly around LSD. Interestingly, and very relevantly, the 13th step in the AA, as it was originally designed, was an LSD trip. And then, unfortunately, there was a strong pushback on drugs in the 60s, led by Nixon and the DEA, and all of that research stopped. And so there was a huge amount of research before that, particularly in MDMA, and particularly in LSD. And really, there was significant breakthroughs made in how these drugs can be used in conjunction with therapy to significantly improve outcomes for individuals and therefore their families and their communities who are suffering with addiction, but also with other mental health conditions. And then, unfortunately, that research just stopped with the work that the DEA did, and the influence that the US had at a UN level, and all the UN charters on drug control were introduced. And I probably don't want to get too evangelical about it, but you know, a certain Professor David Nutt did a lot of research for Tony Blair when he was appointed as a drug czar. For Tony Blair, about what the UK should do when Tony Blair came to government with drug regulation. And he did what all good researchers do, and he identified the drugs that cause most harm to society. And by far and away, the drug that caused most harm to society was alcohol, followed by tobacco, and then way down.
Sugar in there as well?
No, because that's a food.
Quite addicted. Yeah.
But it's just, what does one person consider something that's just ingrained into society that's normal, and what does someone else consider that's deeply harmful? And it was really, that's quite a disappointing incident that happened in the 60s, where all that research was stopped.
Very much.
Because we as a company, we use these drugs to make therapy more effective. We know in the context of treating addiction that therapy by itself isn't particularly effective. The AA, as admirable as the AA is, it has a 90% relapse rate.
Wow. You don't hear that very often, do you?
No, you don't hear that at all. Can you imagine if you were trying to treat cancer?
Yeah.
And you had a 90% failure rate, right?
Yeah.
And you had something else that has the potential to have an 86% success rate.
Yeah. I know where I'm shopping.
Yeah, exactly. But just some regulators somewhere said that, this isn't what is allowed.
Wow.
So, yeah, we really think that, by using psychedelic drugs in conjunction with psychotherapy, we have a significant potential to improve outcomes for individuals, their families, and their communities whose lives are being destroyed by addiction. And what we want to do is we want to make them available at scale. So that's why we have the research part of the business, the biotech side of the business, and then we have a healthcare and a delivery part of the business. Biotech research is to run R&D programs through the traditional regulatory stage gates to secure on-label approval, marketing authorization, regulatory approval, deliver these at scale with the support of the public healthcare system and with the insurance companies. And then we have a healthcare business where we are understanding the delivery model, both ourselves and through out-licensing businesses, to enable us to understand the delivery model, the operating model, generate data to support interactions with regulators, and just to build the ecosystem to get the addiction treatment industry up to speed with these compounds prior to marketing authorization. And the one thing I should probably, going down a rabbit hole, but we're working with ketamine.
Yeah.
Ketamine is already an approved medicine. So it's approved as a painkiller and as an anesthetic. And we are working with that in an off-label fashion. We're conducting research with ketamine to get it on label, and we're able to commercialize that in an off-label fashion in advance of marketing authorization to enable us to establish the ecosystem to retool the addiction treatment industry before delivering it at scale in a non-label fashion.
Quite foundational, isn't it? You're really building the bricks again from the 60s.
Yeah, hopefully.
It's like, yeah. So just rewinding as well, and we'll get into Professor David Nutt, your team, Dr. Ben Sessa as well, hugely impressive people as well. And just rewinding the clock for you as well, Anthony, because this is not a traditional industry for you as well. How did you get into this market? You know, you've been working with Aon, with Bank of America, Bank of Ireland. Really hugely impressive CV. How did you get involved with co-founding a biotech and clinics?
Yeah, so my career, I did a degree and a master's in technology. I always wanted to know, or I wanted to know how money worked coming out of university. So I got a job in banking. So I worked with Merrill Lynch for a couple of years on the capital market side. Worked with Bank of Ireland on the capital market side after that for a while. And then I left banking during the financial crisis. And I went to work for Aon, world's largest reinsurance broker, and actually, what most people don't know is actually one of the largest placers of capital into the capital markets through the pension funds they administer.
Oh, okay.
And so, large company, did an MBA, ended up in the fast track with them as ultimately chief operating officer for the risk consulting business, and then did some other stuff as well. But my job was in London, and my family were in Dublin. So I was in London 3 days a week for probably the best part of 8 years. And it just really wasn't very good for me. It wasn't good for my mental health. Aon was very, very, very good to me. I made my career there. But just that working habit of being in London for every week and my family and kids being at home, I just didn't want to do that anymore. So I left Aon and I set up went out my own, did a bit of consulting myself. Couple of small consulting gigs as sort of contract CEO, contract managing director. And one of those was in a consumer packaged goods space. The other was in a biotech space. And through those gigs, I met some people like-minded to myself who understood the benefits that psychedelics have in making therapy more effective. And we all collectively had our brushes with mental health or with addiction, and we decided to come together to set up Awakn Life Sciences. One guy was a consumer packaged goods guy, the other guy was a capital markets guy, and then there was me, sort of professional and financial services. But we all knew the benefits that psychedelics have, and we also all have our reasons for wanting to bring those to bear. So we set up Awakn in 2020, Q1 2020, and we brought in Dr. Ben Sessa as a co-founder, who was Dr. Ben Sessa, for people in the audience, is a leading authority in this industry. He's actually the person who coined the phrase, the psychedelic renaissance, published many books. So we brought Ben in as a fourth co-founder, and we built the company from there with the sole purpose of solving the addiction crisis.
Wonderful. And was the first clinic the Bristol clinic that Dr. Sessa is?
So we have the dual focus of the business, which is R&D and commercialization. And on the R&D side, through Ben, we brought in Professor David Nutt, who was a close friend of Ben's, and through both of our connections, we managed to acquire the IP. We sort of turbocharged the R&D side of the business. We acquired a lot of R&D assets from Professor David Nutt's consultancy company, particularly around faster acting versions of MDMA. We acquired the IP from a clinical trial, phase 2A clinical trial for MDMA to treat alcohol use disorder. And we acquired the asset that was from Imperial College. And then we acquired the assets from the University of Exeter for a phase 2B trial for ketamine assisted therapy to treat alcohol use disorder. And we built the company from there. And then we also opened up your UK's first psychedelic assisted psychotherapy clinic in Bristol. And after that, we opened up a clinic in London. We acquired a clinic up in Oslo, in Norway. And I think just maybe for your audience, like the reason why we're focused on ketamine and we're focused on MDMA is they're particularly useful in the context of making therapy more effective in treating addiction. So if we take MDMA as an example, we know that trauma is a causal factor in addiction. in substance addictions. It's also a significant causal factor in anxiety, depression, PTSD, and eating disorders. And one of the most advanced companies in the psychedelic sector is actually completing their phase 3 trials for MDMA-assisted therapy to treat PTSD in the US. And we imagine, or we hope and plan, that MDMA will actually be on label, will be approved and will be on label in the US to treat PTSD in early 2024. And the question is, why is MDMA that so good at treating, enabling therapy to be more effective in the context of treating trauma, mental health issues that have trauma as a causal factor? It's because MDMA does 3 things. It switches off the fight. First of all, it releases oxytocin, and oxytocin is the chemical that is released by a breastfeeding mother to form a bond between her and her child. And so the single biggest contributing factor to the success of talk-based therapy is the relationship between the therapist and the client. If you can accelerate that relationship, you significantly improve the probability of success of the therapy program. Second thing that MDMA does is it switches off the fight or flight mechanism at the brain. And so because trauma is a causal factor for us for addiction, if you want someone to relive some traumatic events, so the process of becoming addiction can be a traumatic, being addicted can be a traumatic event, but also it's significantly going to be trauma inflicted upon you as a child, as an adolescent. So if you want to relive those experiences to get in and to deal with them, then that body's natural reaction is to just clam up.
Let's get out of here. Yeah.
Walk out the door.
Yeah.
So you dampen that response back down, and then it boosts the empathy mechanism. Yeah. And so it can give people a different perspective on their lives, on themselves, and to forgive people. And so that's why MDMA is particularly helpful in the context, in conjunction with therapy, to treat addiction. And to give you an example, and I know I'm going down the weeds here a bit, to bring this to life, there was someone on our phase 2A trial, and this guy's spoken about this on television. So this is public info. But when he was 10 years old, he was asleep upstairs in his bedroom. His father was working the night shift and his mother was working the late shift. His mother got a lift home with a colleague. Colleague came into the house and unfortunately proceeded to rape and murder this child's mother downstairs in the kitchen. The murderer came upstairs, went into his bedroom and stood over him for a number of seconds or minutes. Time loses sense in those sort of crisis situations, with the knife in his hand. And then he pretended to be asleep and the guy ran away. Guy goes on with life. It was in the 50s or 60s, I think, so not much was spoken about it ever again. Went on with life, married, kids, job, became a chronic alcoholic, lost everything, tried multiple treatment programs. Nothing was successful. He came onto our MDMA phase 2A program, and during one of the sessions, he had an eye mask on, listened to music, but his mother appeared to him. Now, there isn't a trip with MDMA, but there was still a vision. And his mother appeared to him, sat beside him on his bed, back in the bedroom, and he was a 10-year-old boy again. His mom said, "Why do you hate yourself? You couldn't have done anything. You were 10 years old, son. I forgive you." And he goes, he forgave himself. And then the murderer appeared to both of them. And they challenged the murderer together and said, like, why the fuck did you do what you did? You were arrested 3 weeks later and you spent the next 30 years in jail. But they forgave him. Guy's sober 5 years later. Now, if you can imagine how long it would take you in talk-based therapy to get to that level of insight, forgiveness, to forgive yourself, to be forgiven by your mother, but to forgive the murderer, you're talking quite an extended period of time. That insight was achieved in 2 weeks. Sorry, I beg your pardon, 2 months, I beg your pardon. So if you can think of the radical... the
acceleration.
But just the cost reduction. For the NHS, for individuals, families, and communities, this has the ability to radically change outcomes. And then when we look at ketamine, ketamine also does 3 things. Ketamine, there's a strong dissociative effect with ketamine. So that's trip. In a recreational setting, the trip is typically out-of-body experience, looking down on yourself in the here and now. But what we do is we use ketamine and MDMA in conjunction with therapy. So the treatment program, you have a prep session with a qualified psychologist, and the issues are brought to the surface. So then during your dissociative effect or your trip, instead of looking at yourself in the here and now, you're looking at yourself in the totality of your life and those crisis points or those traumatic events that led you perhaps to become addicted. You get a different perspective on them. And again, different perspective gives you the ability to see things differently and potentially forgive yourself or to forgive other people.
Incredible.
And there's also, ketamine gets the brain back into a state of neurogenesis. So it's that state where the brain, where neural connections are forming, quite like when you are back at a teenager. And those memories from being a teenager are much more impactful. So we have the integration session where you integrate those insights and learnings from your dissociative effect during the state of neurogenesis. Those insights and coping mechanisms about the temptations and the pressure points, they're laid down at a much deeper level. And so therefore they become much more ingrained in your psyche and your ego. And then the third thing that ketamine does is it disrupts memories. And this is a known fact that memories are dynamic. They're recalled from the database. And as they're recalled, they're interfered with. But ketamine particularly has a way to disrupt memories and therefore make them less impactful in your life. And we know that memories are a trigger event for relapse. The sight of a pint or the sight of a pub, the smell of a pint triggers the memory of a predicted reward. The sight of a gambling machine, the sight of YouPorn or pornography produces a memory of a predicted future reward. Now, if you can disrupt those triggering memories, they become less impactful and less likely to trigger events. And so that's why we particularly like ketamine and MDMA, because they make therapy much more effective in the context of treating addiction. And that's really what we're working as a company, is we're repurposing those compounds to be used in conjunction with therapy to treat substance addictions, but also really importantly, to also potentially treat behavioral addictions. Because again, we're targeting sort of the brain circuits that house the behaviors that drive the addiction. So rather than developing drugs to block a receptor site, to block the active ingredient interacting, like say naltrexone blocks the opioid receptor, that will never work for behavioral addictions. Behavioral addictions affect about 1 billion people globally, and there's no current standard of care. So not only are we sort of pushing the envelope on developing and commercializing therapeutics to much more effectively treat alcohol addiction, 86% abstinence versus 25% abstinence. We're actually the first company in the world to be developing drug-based therapies to treat behavioral addictions.
Wow. I could listen to you all day. I can't imagine anybody not getting behind this, really. It's such a big problem, isn't it? Like you're saying earlier, 20% of the world, with this.
Unfortunately, there's not many, you go to a family dinner or you go out with your friends, you're not very far removed from someone whose life has been radically disrupted by alcohol or by gambling.
Yeah, it's insane. And how far do you guys, as a leadership team in a business, how far do you look ahead? Are you thinking in 100 years we're going to look back, and if everything, with a downhill, with a wind behind us and downhill, how far can we go? Will it be widely available? Will it be almost kind of walk-in therapy where everybody can access? Is that the big, hairy, audacious goal? It's completely accessible.
That's the wonderful challenge in a leadership role. Is you've got to have one foot in today and one foot in tomorrow. So we have to. There's so much that needs to be done, and there's so much that could be done. But you've got to be very selective, and you've got to focus and execute today. But you got to build the foundations for tomorrow, and that's really what it's always hard to stop yourself going after the next big shiny thing and forgetting to execute and get shit done today. So that's what we look at. So the way that I view the potential for this subset of the CNS, which is a subset of the biotech industry, which is a subset of the life sciences industry, is it's certainly not a panacea to cure all ills, right? There are people for whom this doesn't work. There are people for whom the current treatments do work. There's a guy on my board, former global chief commercial officer from Gilead, and he has friends who've said, no, just AA, because they have the strength of will to persist with AA. But there's a lot of people that it doesn't work for. So For us, when I look at the future, there's four evolutions in the psychedelics industry. Evolution one is where we are currently today or in the next couple of years, and it is the traditional psychedelics running through marketing authorization and being delivered through in the public health, in private clinics, in public healthcare, and reimbursed through insurance. And that's ketamine today because it's already on label, but it's being delivered off label, and then it'll be on label, and then it's also MDMA and potentially psilocybin. And that's wave one. And wave one is probably going to be the next 10 years. Then after that, there is going to be, next 10 years, and then you're going to have somewhere in the mix there, technology is going to be delivered or introduced to increase the scale. Because probably one of the things we're going to get to in a while is the rate limiting factor for this industry is the fact that you need it's high touch. And it's currently high touch with humans. And there's a shortage of humans who have experience in delivering the therapy side of these treatments. So wave one is the traditional psychedelics. Wave two is sort of efficiency and scale enabled by technology. Wave three, and that's 10 years, a 10-year horizon. Wave three is next generation psychedelics. So some of what we're working on is we've got a new NCE, new chemical entity development program, where we're looking to develop an entactogen. So MDMA is an entactogen. So we're looking to develop the next generation of that will hopefully work in 2 hours, because delivery time in clinic, as with all healthcare businesses, is critical. So if you can shorten, you're there. And there's other people working to. There's a psychedelic compound called 5-MeO that's very short acting. So there's people working to extend that. People like us are working to shorten MDMA. Other companies are working to shorten psilocybin to get to about a 2 hour in treatment experience. So that's wave three. And then wave four will be compounds specifically designed for specific indications or for specific individuals. And that's the way it's going to go. But ultimately speaking, this is going to be one of the mainstream ways that addiction and mental health is treated. And the reason for that is the current treatments for addiction and mental health lack innovation and unfortunately lack efficacy. There are no treatments available currently for behavioral addictions. There are treatments available for alcohol use disorder, but they are not as effective for all people as they could be. So we're looking to solve that, and we're looking to provide hope for individuals, families, and communities who are being destroyed by addiction. And then likewise, for other mental health conditions like PTSD, there are treatments, but they are expensive, they take a long time, and they're not always effective. So MDMA shows a very, very good potential for curing. And we used to be curing PTSD, not with us, with other companies, but also then psilocybin has shown great promise for treating treatment-resistant depression. So for some people, current treatments for depression will work, but for those people for whom it doesn't work, psilocybin is showing great promise. So I think this is going to be, in the next 10, 15 years, this is going to be a core pillar in treatment for addiction and treatment for mental health. And these therapeutics will be tools in the toolbox for practitioners to provide hope for people for whom the traditional treatments aren't working. And then there'll just continue to be evolutions beyond that as the drugs are updated to be more in line with the current the current infrastructure, which is shorter treatment windows. And then they'll be updated to become more specific to indications. And then they'll become more updated to be specific to treatment time, indication, and then individual. And that is just where the innovation will come.
Wow, fantastic. And maybe that's a nice point to segue into the area that I'm most involved with is people. And as we spoke about, this is very high touch people industry. And one quick question is, how well are all the biotechs or competitors of yours, how well do you all work together as an industry? I mean, is everybody pulling in the same direction?
I think so. You've got the usual strategic tensions, right? Competitive pressures, but I think there's definitely a strong cohort of people in the industry who firmly believe, like we do, that it's significantly easier to grow the pie than it is just to argue over a slice of the pie.
Yeah.
And for example,
Yeah.
I was thank you. I was over in London last Thursday, speaking at a conference, and three of my other fellow psychedelic CEOs were there. Two of them were on the stage with me, and one was in the audience.
We had
a great photograph afterwards of all of us, and it was like, just sharing a sparkling water or a beer, whatever was everyone's typical.
Yeah,
right. But obviously, all facing the same challenges.
Yeah,
but all looking forward to the same opportunities, and then working out how we can support each other both by just chatting, because you don't get to chat that much, or actually by helping work together to solve some big problems. So I think we're, by its nature, this industry has attracted people who are interested in doing good, and so therefore we are predisposed to working together to solve problems together. And definitely in a nascent industry like ours, we are more interested in working together to solve these problems together rather than competing.
So we're moving on to my favorite piece of the jigsaw puzzle, Anthony, which is my theory on most business problems are solved by people. Obviously there's some technology influence and so on, but what are your thoughts on that? How do you think that's going to impact your world, your business, the industry as a whole, and how are you going about tackling some of those challenges?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So you're absolutely right. Certainly, our company and most companies that I've experienced are at their core, they're people businesses, and there aren't many challenges that people can't solve when working together. So I think our talent agenda it's a mix of bringing a mix of generalists and specialists together to solve issues. And the great thing about our company is we're a mission-driven company, and everyone in the company shares our mission, which is to solve addiction and also mental health issues. So we're really lucky. We've got a really good mix of generalists. So certainly I'm a generalist, but also specialists in our biotech side and in our healthcare side. And that mix of generalists and specialists together gives us the ability to look at problems and solve them in a creative manner. We have conversations, we have respectful conversations, but we work together to look at problems from a different angle and come together to solve them. So that mix of specialists and generalists who are all pointed in the same direction and who are all mission driven, that's really critical for us. And that's certainly our talent agenda, on top of all the usual stuff about retention, attraction, retention, and development of talent.
And we spoke briefly earlier on as well about academies and internal learning and development functions as well, creating a standardized approach as well. Do you think that's something that you might employ over the years, or do you think it can work?
Yeah, so I think one of the main, I believe, talent challenges that's going to face the psychedelics industry, and currently is going to face the psychedelics industry, is the availability of suitably qualified and experienced therapists. In our business, in the healthcare side of our business, it's the therapists. The therapists are the magic sauce in the business. On the healthcare side, they're where the rubber hits the road in this industry. It's where they are treating and delivering therapy. Now, you have a challenge with that because the experience of the client and therefore the potential outcomes for the client are disproportionately impacted by the quality of the experience they have in clinic. With a standard healthcare model, it can be, you go into your GP, it's 15 minutes and a prescription. Whereas for this industry, it's, you're sitting with someone for a couple of hours over multiple sessions over multiple weeks. And the therapist has the ability to disproportionately impact the quality of the outcome. So having a suitable number, when you think of the scale of the problem where this industry is looking to solve, that's quite a large volume of therapists and clinics. So having a suitable number of those available, that's the main talent agenda or the talent challenge for the industry. Now we're going about it by solving it in a particular way by really looking to standardize what we do, and that standardization gives us the ability to efficiently train people and efficiently, identify and broaden the talent pool, because we can train people pretty efficiently to deliver a standardized treatment approach. Great help for us is that standardized approach is something that should translate through to acceptance by regulators and by payers in the insurance business. But that's the biggest talent challenge that faces this industry, I believe. It's not at the top level. It's actually at the therapist level, where therapists have a disproportionate impact on the quality of the outcome. We're solving it one way. Other companies are choosing to solve it a different way.
Yeah. Do you think, peeling back the onion, do you think there's enough people coming through at the kind of education level to solve the problem in 10 years, for example?
No.
So,
there is
too much at the university level.
Well, there's a chronic shortage of healthcare workers in most developed economies. Yes. There are not that many therapists, mental health therapists or addiction specialist therapists out there, let alone there being that many psychedelic mental health or addiction therapists. So there is a global healthcare talent shortage, exacerbated coming out of COVID, when many healthcare professionals left the industry on the back of burnout. So there is unfortunately a war for talent in the healthcare industry. And then there's on top of that, there's an even greater shortage of therapists, and then you've got the added specialism of psychedelics. So no, I think that is a challenge that the industry faces. Two ways forward: standardization to enable consistency and efficiency of training, or use technology as an enabler. And I think both of those are things that need to be brought to bear. I think, yes, universities need to add this psychedelics in as a core component of master's degree, undergraduate and graduate programs. I think companies like us need to work out how we can standardize and efficiently train people, but also then technology needs to be brought to bear to act as an enabler, both from training at scale, but perhaps in some way replacing or augmenting and enabling the therapists to just deliver more at scale.
Absolutely. And I was listening to, I think it was just highlights of Rishi Sunak talking about overseas workers as well, and some of the challenges that they have. And I don't want to get too political because I don't have enough depth of knowledge
like
on
we're
it.
getting into my favourite topic, Brexit.
Yeah, I was listening to one of the MPs who was sort of, speaking at PMQs about the psychedelic industry. That was really great to hear the other day. And I was listening to Rishi talking about migration, and then I was listening to another politician who was talking about we need to harvest more of what we've already got. And I was thinking, we haven't got it, mate. We haven't got it. So, like dentistry, for example, mega problems because dentists have just gone back to the EU. No, thanks very much. I'm okay.
Well, look, we're in the EU in Ireland, and there's a shortage of healthcare
practitioners.
So I actually don't think, as much as I get, can poke at Brexit, it's a developed economy talent shortage as populations age. And there's a shortage in nursing, there's a shortage in healthcare practitioners. And certainly in Ireland, we don't make the healthcare industry a particularly attractive industry to come and work in. What you're a doctor and you're expected to work whatever crazy hours it is here, where you can go to Australia and have a normal job, normal lifestyle. So it's I think the healthcare industry has a talent attraction, retention, and certainly probably development challenge as well, right? And those need to be solved. And certainly then in the psychedelics industry, we need to solve for talent development, talent retention, and talent attraction at the therapist level. That's really where we need lots of people. The doctor is not a bottleneck on there, because you can have one psychiatrist operating across multiple clinics, because the doctors are doing the initial medical assessment and the prescribing, etc. But actually, it's the therapist that there's going to be a significant bottleneck around. And so, just like there's a talent supply shortage in many sectors, there is a talent and will continue to be a talent supply shortage in the therapist side of the psychedelic assisted therapy industry. And I think the way you've got to do it is you got to standardize things, but also then you've got to use technology as an enabler.
Absolutely. That's really great points, Anthony. We could probably talk for hours on that one particular topic there. That's really exciting. And Yeah, it's been really great, very insightful, and it's very winning. You know, when you're talking earlier on, I was just thinking, why, you know, how would somebody not get behind this as well? And just maybe diverting slightly on that one as well. Is investment still positive across the industry of psychedelic assisted therapy?
No.
Why not, do you think?
You've got a risk off environment. Risk is off because of geopolitics and macroeconomics. The biotech sector had a very strong bull run coming out of the financial crisis right up until Q1 2021, and then started to flatline and dropped off a cliff towards the end of 2021. And we're risk off because macroeconomics driven by inflation. Inflation drives interest rates up. When interest rates go up, investment comes out of the equities and goes into interest-bearing investments. And then you've got geopolitics with everything that we know that's going on in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Those two things take a chunk of money out of the capital markets. You also had people going back to work after COVID, so all the day traders came out. So all of that looked to just take capital out of the capital markets and move us into a risk off. When your biotech is a risky sector, so when you have risk off, the funds are all closed to new stories, and it just starts to pare back from there. So we're in a tough cycle in the biotech sector and the capital markets. Potentially, I believe it's the worst cycle that has ever occurred in the biotech sector. So that is then feeding through to the CNS space, as feeding through to psychedelics. So in the public markets, we're publicly traded. Public markets are a challenge, but it's cyclical. The capital markets are cyclical. We're in a down cycle right now and risk off. As soon as risk comes back on, cycle will come back, and there is a huge amount of capital to be brought to bear to the biotech industry. The funds are not mandated to sit on capital. The capital may be redeemed, but ultimately the capital that is sitting in the funds will need to be deployed as soon as we move back into a risk-on environment. And in that situation, people, funds and investors should look around, and they should currently look around at assets that are currently undervalued. And there are some companies in the psychedelic space that are undervalued, given the potential that this industry has to effectively solve some very large problems that have suffered from a significant lack of innovation over the last number of decades. But in summary, it's a challenging time for the biotech industry as a whole. There are an awful lot of companies currently trading below cash on hand. So their market cap is less than the cash they actually have in the bank. Now, you know that is a dislocated market when that is happening, but it is just cyclical. And when it changes, when the market comes around, the biotech industry should pick back up.
Wow, it's really exciting. I'll make sure I share all of the links to how people can connect with you, Awakn Life Sciences, Awakn Clinics, and I'll make sure it's published in widely in as many places. And one thing we didn't touch on actually was Dr. Ben Sessa's feature on Netflix as well. Maybe that's the best place to end. Yeah, that's a really great kudos, testament to his position in the industry as well, and the importance of having those guys on board.
Absolutely. Now, we're particularly lucky with some of the team members that we have across the board. We've got the former Global Chief Commercial Officer from Gilead, Paul Carter, the former CEO of the Priory on our board, Steve Page. And then on the management team, we're lucky enough to have Professor David Nutt, head of department in Imperial. He's our Chief Research Officer. Got Professor Celia Morgan, head of Exeter, both global authorities in the use of psychedelics to treat addiction. We've got Dr. Ben Sessa, who's a good global authority in the use of MDMA to treat addiction, and Dr. Laurie Higbed. So we've got some really good team members. Ben featured on the Netflix documentary, or the Netflix docuseries, How to Change Your Mind, by Michael Pollum. It was really, really good. I believe we're the only private company, or the only commercial company to have actually been featured in the series, and it was just great to have Ben and our clinic in Bristol. I think it's still under construction, it was great to have Ben featured.
Yeah, amazing. What a great asset as well, something to share as well for life. Well, ever Netflix is around, anyways.
Yeah.
How did that come around anyway? Is that just something through his network, or is it was it Awakn feature? We want to.
Ben is pretty well known in the industry, so a lot of media, and Ben is incredibly knowledgeable. He is a global expert and a global authority. And so we are lucky that when various media outlets want to learn about psychedelics and have someone speak about psychedelics, we have got three of the world authorities working for us in Dr. Ben Sessa, Professor Celia Morgan, and Professor David Nutt. And so they received quite a lot of inbound inquiries. So that was Ben being a world expert. Netflix wanted to speak to him.
What a guy. And we've had Medica recently last week, and CPHI, the sort of pharma big conferences. Does the psychedelic industry have a similar schedule? Is it as productive and efficient as?
Yeah. There is. There are three main conferences in the psychedelics industry. Two of them are academic in their origins, but now also becoming business focused. And one of them is primarily business focused. So there is the academic origins one that now is becoming business focused. In New York is Horizons, and then in Europe it's ICPR in the Netherlands. And then the purely commercial one is an operation called Wonderland, which is typically in Miami. And those three conferences together cover off the deep academic experience and expertise in this industry, and how that is now moving towards commercialization and embracing industry. And that's Horizons and ICPR. And then there's the Wonderland conference in Miami, which is very much focused on the commercial and the industry, bringing this to bear into the industry, certainly for the US market.
Were you in Miami, or was it one of the team? I'm trying to remember who was
I was there last year, and Ben and David spoke last year. And then this year we had Dr. Loan Stewart, who runs our Nordic business. He was there and he was speaking on stage. He's a pretty heavy hitter in the area of the uses of ketamine to treat mental health and addiction issues.
Wonderful. Well, I'm really excited to see what's next. I'm sure the audience will be as well. Eternally grateful for your time and insight. And so, it's very, very privileged to be able to have your audience and have a really great conversation. So thanks so much. Amazing work. And I'll make sure I share as far and wide as I possibly can.
Listen, Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Great to speak to your audience today as well. And let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Speak soon, Anthony.
Wonderful. Take care. Thank you.